Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to play a game here. Ukraine War Stories. I don't know what I presume we all know what this game is about, but I don't know where the game is going to lead us. So thank you very much for joining me on this adventure, and let's get this going. So I did go through this is the first screen that it gives us once the settings are done. All right, it was barely past 1700, but it was getting dark already. Spring was on its way in, but we were still getting early sunset and cold nights. Another quiet evening in the house that was entirely too big for just me and my Lilia, ever since our daughter had settled in Kiev. No surprise there, Hostomel was always too small for her. Beautiful art. Still, she kept in touch with us. In fact, that evening I was just trying to figure out a present for her, a smartphone. Well, I wasn't trying anymore. I delegated the task to the neighbor's girl, Milena Mirzoyan. Sorry about the names, people. Milena is a bright girl, top of her class at the medical university in Kiev. Much younger than my own daughter, Katya, barely in her 20s, quick-witted and full of life. Unlike me, a tired old man. I've been an aviation engineer for 40 years before retiring, and yet those modern gadgets are beyond anything I've worked with. Now my wife, Lilia, she is a savvy one, but that evening she was preoccupied. Oleksi, Oleksi, she said in a worried voice. Oleksi, have you heard what Putin is saying? He recognized those republic in Donbass. She clutched at her chest. Oh God, the Russians are going to invade. I looked over to see her watching a Russian broadcast on YouTube, and I could only roll my eyes. For the last few weeks, what Putin was saying was everyone's favorite gossip, that a big war was coming, that the Russians were finally going to invade in full force. That's why Milena left Kiev a day ago and came to join her parents in Hostomel. Many people fled the capital in the last few days. It was as if everybody expected Kiev to be bombed off the face of the earth. Lily, please, nothing's gonna happen, I said. When I caught Milena's glance, she was afraid too. Mr. Borisov, they've got so many troops on our borders, they wouldn't keep them there if they were just bluffing. That's exactly how bluffs work, child. I chuckled. We have nothing to fear, because... Okay, so we get to choose. The right time for the attack has passed. Putin will try to annex Donbass at most. If Putin invades the UN, will even if he doesn't have nearly enough forces. What did people think? I think that they were waiting maybe for support, but it already happened, right? If Putin recognizes those republics, don't you think that that's all he's after? He's keeping forces on our borders to keep our lines stretched thin so that he can easily take Donbass and freeze the war for another 8 years. I tried giving the girls a reassuring smile. In retrospect, it may have looked a little smug. You know, at least I took a first aid courses and stocked up on some gauze. That'll be useful, right, darling? She looked at Milena, who replied with enthusiastic nodding. You could have done something useful as well instead of buying more model planes. I just chuckled. I could tell she was just worried. She didn't mean it one bit. Look, if you're so worried, I'll go get the car fueled up. Say, on Thursday. We weren't using our car much except to buy groceries, so the near empty tank didn't seem like an issue. With my bum leg, I barely left home anyway, and Lilia worked as a teacher. Her students were all on distance learning. Yeah, COVID, right? Then we'll go on a vacation in the Carpathians. A week, no, 2 weeks, until this whole deal resolves itself, and you'll see that I was right. Stocking up on fuel is a good idea, Milula chipped in. My dad is stocking up as well before the prices rise even more. I nodded. I didn't believe war was coming, and if I did, could I do anything to prevent it? But there was something I could do. Help everyone stay calm. Millennial mood, +2, Lilia mood, from 1 to 2. Next. Alright, so mood is getting better. There was a deafening noise outside wrestling me from sleep instantly. At first, I didn't believe my own ears. I thought I hadn't woken up at all, and this was all a nightmare. But then I heard the noise again. Explosions. Oh God, Lashia, they're bombing the airfield. Look, those helicopters are shooting rockets. Leo. You guys saw that on the news, those scenes? I looked around and saw my wife. She was already running towards the window. Did she hear it first? She was always a quicker thinker between us two. After a night of sleep, stepping on my bum leg felt even worse than usual. I limped towards Lily and looked into the window. I didn't have the eyesight to make out the details, but I saw helicopters swarming over the Hostomel airfield, launching bright flares all around them. No rockets, flares. They do it so our soldiers don't shoot them down. They're fixing to deploy the airborne troops. Lily covered her mouth with her hands and looked at me. I didn't think I've ever seen her so confused and scared. Pack our things, we might have to leave town. As my wife ran around the house packing up everything of any value, I was trying to process what was happening. The war had begun. I had seen it with my own eyes, but still I couldn't comprehend it. I was so convinced that the Russians would never act upon their threats. What a fool I've been. There was gunfire coming from the airfield. It snapped me back into reality. I had to do something. When I went to check on Lily, I saw her hands were shaking. I had to calm her down, or at least make sure she didn't forget to pack anything important. On the other hand, I never got around to refueling our car. I only had enough petrol to drive to the nearest fueling station. Okay, so help Lily pack up. Gonna help Lily. It's gonna reassure her. Ask neighbors for gasoline. Comfort Lily. Okay, so consequences. Okay, we're not going to look at the stats, okay? I was looking at the stats. I don't want that to influence. Okay, chat. So what would you do? Would you comfort Lily? Help her pack? Or ask our neighbors for gasoline? I think the first thing is family, right? With a sight, I gave Lily a hug. She quietly said, Leosha, I'm scared. She very rarely admitted such things. It reminded me how confident I was just a few days ago that the Russians weren't going to invade. What a fool I was. What's going to happen now? I hugged her closer and tried to come up with something reassuring. Surprisingly, I didn't sound unsure. I don't know, honey, but I doubt the Russians will succeed. Our army spent the last 8 years learning to fight. So we'll hold the Russians off. As long as we don't panic, we'll be all right. I don't know how long we just stood there, but in that time, the gunfire had died down. Lily withdrew and quietly wept tears from her eyes. She seemed almost calmed down. I'll go put a kettle. Since those Russians woke us up, let's have some morning tea. I think I had a box of chocolate somewhere. We had a splendid tea party, all things considered. Too splendid, really. It convinced us that life went on, and there was no cause for worrying. Things were still normal enough. I will never forgive myself for believing that, and not getting Lilia out of Hostimo on that same day. Okay, so we drop down. Oleski, what will we do? Lilia complained, sniffling away the last of her tears. Do you hear it? Do you hear how loud it was? How terrible? I nodded and hugged Lilia closer. I sure heard it around 3 a.m. and we were sleeping in the basement. A shell hit our house. I don't know what it was, but it shook the whole place. I was crawling around looking for my cane, wondering if we should stay put or run while Lilia was covering her ears and screaming. Then we were sure the walls weren't tumbling down on us. She started crying. This would all be over soon, I hope. But at that time, all I could do was hold her close. The very next morning, when the fighting had quieted down, I heard a knock on our basement door. Our neighbors came to visit us, the whole Mirzoyan family, Milena and her parents. Oleksi, Lilia, David, the father of the family, walked up to me and firmly shook my hand. How are you two doing? Are you all right? We saw your house get hit. Thank the Almighty you weren't there. No kidding. We have to leave, David. This is getting too dangerous. David's wife, Ola, chimed in. We can't leave Oleski Ferdovovich. We've spoken with the Territorial Defense Office. They said it's too dangerous. They're already talking about the Russians shooting at cars. I wanted to curse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, the war had been going on for 8 years now, but it wasn't Donbass. On the edge of the country, now the Russians were taking up their planes and tanks and bombs all the way up to Kyiv. I shook my head. Tell me, did they take the Antonov airport? If they did, the road to Kyiv would be wide open. We'd be seeing thousands, if not tens of thousands of men and vehicles rolling out in the next few days. No, my friend. They didn't. It's quite a story, really, David said, and motioned for his wife and daughter to carry on without him. They brought us some supplies and took them downstairs. David meanwhile told me the news. They had yet to make it to the TV, but the gossip had already spread around town. The Russians took the Antonov airport, but it's all shelled to bits, unusable. They won't be landing anything there or using any of our planes. I gasped, and David cut himself off. He didn't need to continue. Miriatu, is it gone? I've worked for the Antonov Design Bureau for 40 years. Aviation was my life, still is. However, little of that life is left in me. And nothing the Antonov Bureau ever made came even close to the AN 225 Mriya. Raya? The biggest cargo plane ever designed, a marvel of engineering, Soviet, Ukrainian, it didn't matter. Mriya was a treasure. I thought it was terrible waste that it was barely flown in our 3 decades of independence, but that day I learned of a truly terrible waste. I felt this sting in my chest and clutched it. David quickly rushed to support me. He helped me sit down on the ground. I couldn't walk at first, so he continued. What a rotten world, huh? I told my girl to wait out the war in House Motel if it came, and now the war has come here. He reached into his jacket's inner pocket, and before I knew it, there was a bottle in his hand. I was appalled at first, drinking at a time like this, but David kept talking. Nothing is sacred to those Russians. Destroying Mriya is bad enough. But you know that what they do to women if the Russians get here. If they do, I can't calm my girls down, and I can't protect them either. I don't even have a gun. He reached to uncork the bottle, drawing my attention to it. It was the finest Armenian cognac money could buy. Save the bottle. Maria was a terrible loss, but I didn't know what to think about it. But drowning my sorrow in alcohol was not an option. If David was so sure that the war would only last a few days, I said, surely his cognac was better spent celebrating victory. David frowned, but had to agree. He even told me to keep the bottle. That way, he'd be sure it survived until our victory. He wasn't wrong there. I barely drank. And we never kept any alcohol at home, so when I came to the basement to stash the bottle, Lilia had some questions. It's a gift from David, he said. We'll open it when it's time to celebrate our victory, I said. I didn't tell her about the Maria. Lily gave me a sideways look, but soon realized I was being honest. She smiled. That's a wonderful idea. Give him my thanks. The day drew to a close, and me and David were parting ways just before the curfew. Shots were already ringing out somewhere far. The night, like the one before it, was going to be loud. Suddenly, we heard the sound of approaching vehicles. What do you know? Our armed forces have finally arrived, David asked, and looked out into the road. Then his face dropped. As the armored vehicles rolled down the road, we could see the bright white Z's painted on them. Okay, so the tanks are rolling in. I don't want to make this video too long, so let's make this a few part series. Thank you very much for sticking in, guys. And we'll be right back.